Hello and welcome back to Cultural Geography. So again, I will be making video lectures that accompany the chapter in your textbook. The video will highlight some of the key points in the chapter, but not all of them. Therefore, it's your job to be responsible for the materials covered in the textbook, as you will be quizzed on this material as well. In this video lecture, I introduce what a population pyramid is and what they tell us about the population. So on that note, let's get exploring. So a population pyramid is simply a graph that shows the age-sex distribution of a given population. So it's a graphic profile of the population's residents. So sex is shown on the left and right side, age on the vertical axis, and the population on the horizontal axis. Each group, for example, males aged 0 to 4, is referred to or called a cohort. A population pyramid shows the number of people within each cohort. Demographers use population pyramids to see population trends in the past, examine the current resident profile, and also to project how the population will increase or decrease in the future. And looking here, we can see this is a population pyramid for the world in 2014. So there are three basic shapes of a population pyramid that we should know. First, let's briefly look at the bottom shaded area. This is the pre-reproductive, or young children, usually 14 years of age and under. Reproductive are people between the ages of 15 and 49, and post-reproductive are people over the age of 49. So now let's take a look at each of these three shapes represent. So we have the first is the expansive or expanding. An expansive population pyramids are used to describe populations that are young and growing. They are often characterized by their pyramid shape, which has a broad base and a narrow top. Expansive population pyramids show a large percentage of the population in the younger age cohorts, usually with each age cohort smaller in size than the one below it. These types of populations are typically representative of developing nations, whose populations have a high fertility rate and a lower than average life expectancy. The next is stationary or stable population pyramid, and stable or near stable population pyramids are used to describe populations that are not growing. They are characterized by their rectangular shape, displayed somewhat equal percentages across age cohorts that taper off towards the top. So these pyramids are often characteristic of developed nations, where birth rates are low and overall quality of life is high. The final one, constructive or diminishing pyramids. Constructive population pyramids, or constrictive population pyramids are used to describe populations that are elderly and shrinking. Constrictive populations can often look like beehives and typically have an inverted shape, where the graph tapering in at the bottom. Constrictive pyramids have smaller percentage of people in the younger age cohort and are typically characteristic of countries where higher level of socioeconomic development, where access to quality education and health care is available to a large portion of the population. So that kind of summarizes the basics of these three shapes of population pyramids. So this figure illustrates how each of these basic shapes align with the demographic transition model stage. For stage 5, which is not shown here, would be a further or more pronounced contraction. So here is a population pyramid of Afghanistan, which is a classic example of an expansive population. Note that the wide base and very few elderly. Expansive or expanding population pyramids have this classic triangle pyramid shape, which indicates a high birth rate due to poor access to birth control, lack of women's rights, education, etc. All things we've discussed in previous lectures. Furthermore, there are very few elderly people due to high death rates due to poor medical care, nutrition, and war, just to name a few. Generally speaking, an expansive population is characteristic of a lower standard of living. So here, stationary or stable population periods have this half ellipse shape. The base of the population pyramid is similar in the width to the population of the reproductive ages, which indicates a stable population. Generally speaking, stable populations are characteristic of high standards of living, low birth rate due to good family planning, access to birth control, financial planning, education, and a low death rate due to good medical care, nutrition, etc. In these population pyramids, it's important to note that units expressed for population. In Iceland population pyramid, the population is expressed in thousands, and for Afghanistan, it was expressed in millions. So be careful when you compare graphs that you're comparing whether it's in thousands or in millions. Here's an example of contractive population pyramid. And here we notice that the base is very low or very narrow for the reproductive age population. So this indicates a decreasing population trend and of a well-developed country. And so this, for example, is Germany in 2016. For Germany, note that this narrow base and the wide population base between 45 and 79 years of age. This pyramid structure can cause significant problems for a country, as we'll discuss under the case studies section in this lecture. So here are some fun and interesting population pyramids to look at. First is Madison County. Why do you suppose there are so many people between the ages of 15 and 24? Madison County has several colleges, so one might suspect this. Also look at that once they have completed their college education, they leave Madison County. This next population pyramid is for Elmore County. Note the disproportionate number of males between the ages of 20 and 44 years of age. So why do you suppose this is? There's a military base here. So as you can see, there are lots of information that can be extracted from a population pyramid. So now let's turn our attention to dependency ratio. And dependency ratio measures the percentage of dependent people, not of working age, divided by the number of people working age. These are the economically active people. So people considered not of working age are those under the age of 15 and those over 65 years of age. Therefore, people of working age are those between 15 and 65. It's a simplistic calculation which is used across the world to understand societies and to get a sense of potential pressures the economy may face in supporting an economically dependent population. One of the obvious limitations of the dependency ratio is the assumption that people under 15 years of age and those 65 and over are outside of the labor force, as well as the assumption that those ages 15 to 64 are participating in the labor force. We all know these assumptions are flawed. Dependency ratio is helpful for comparing societies over time, as well as comparing countries. You can calculate the ratio by adding together the percentage of children, ages under 15, and those older population, ages over 65, divided by the percentage of the working age population, age 15 to 64, and then multiplying that percentage by 100, or that number by 100, so it's a ratio expressed as dependents per 100 people, ages 15 to 64. So the higher the dependency ratio, the more people who are not working of working age, and fewer who are in the labor force and paying taxes. Don't worry about calculating any dependency ratios. I want you to understand just what it is. So let's look at a couple case examples here. So in 2015, the age dependency ratio, the percentage of working age population in the United States, was 50.91. Over the past 55 years, the value of these indicators has fluctuated between 67.3 in 1962 and 48.57 in 2008. So what this is saying is that 50.9 people per 100 working age population are dependent on those working. In other words, about half the U.S. population is dependent on the working population. So here's a population pyramid looks like for 2016 for the United States. So roughly 50% of the population falls in the middle of this pyramid. However, notice that the base, young children, is contracting. What does this possibly mean for the future of the U.S.? With fewer children being born, there will be fewer people entering the workforce, which means there will be less people paying taxes to support all the government programs and supporting the elderly. But remember this population pyramid. Here's another example for Sweden. The latest value for age-adjusted ratio, again the percentage of working age population, in Sweden was 59.30 as of 2015. So over the past 55 years, the value of this indicator has fluctuated between 59.3 in 2015 and 50.6 in 1965. So in other words, 59.3 people per 100 of the Swedish population is dependent on the working population. And so here is the population pyramid looks like in 2016 for Sweden. Note that this is in thousands and not millions like the United States. And again, we have a large portion of the people in the working age category here. So here's a population pyramid that we just saw for Germany in 2011. As I mentioned, the birth, is very narrow, meaning there are very few births. In fact, Germany is currently experiencing a negative growth rate of about negative 0.1% for 2011. Also note the large population between the ages of 40 and 79. Now let's turn our attention to the year 2035. Again, we note the narrow base, but perhaps more alarming is the growing number of dependents, 65 and over. This trend may have many important implications. So as a geographer or demographer or public health official, what are some of the possible implications arise from this problem where we have few children being born and a large base or a large number of people dependent? For example, what are some economic consequences of this? Germany has many entitlements such as healthcare, vacation, etc. that are all dependent on taxes. If the workforce is not being replaced, for those retiring, where are these new tax revenue going to come from to maintain these entitlements? Under these circumstances, what is Germany to do? So here is one strategy that came into effect. The federal government pays mothers or fathers 2/3 of their last net paycheck, up to $2,360, for up to 12 months as long as they stay home and take care of their baby. And if another parent takes an additional 2 months off to care for the child, the government adds 2 more months of pay on top of that. The government understands that this upfront money is negligible in comparison to the child will pay in taxes over their lifetime. So this is an incentive or a way that the German government is using to have more children. So Japan has experienced similar problems. So here we have a country where 12-hour workdays are common. The electronic giant has taken to letting its employees leave early twice a week for a rather unusual reason, to encourage them to have more babies. So one reason for the low birth rate is this 12-hour workday, but there are several other factors compounding the problem. Among them is the high cost of living, the social rigidity towards women, and parenting. So what are the reasons for these low birth rates? So, as we just talked about. So here are the population pyramid for Japan in 2016 on the left and 2035 on the right. Notice that there are very contractive shaped pyramids. Look at 2035 at the very large elderly population and the few children. Wow, that is an important trend that is occurring here. So Japan has a very strict immigration policy as well. So who's going to take care of this growing population of the elderly people? There's certainly not enough children being born to become nurses, doctors, and other types of home care people in the home care field. So let's see what they're going to do. While this article is from 2013, it still stresses the concerns about the cost of aging elderly people here. So Here he says Japan's new government is barely a month old, and already one of its most senior members has insulted tens of millions of voters by suggesting that the elderly are an unnecessary drain on the country's finances. Comments are likely to cause one of Japan's most important quarters of 128 million population is aged over 60. So they want to kind of hurry up and die. These people are costing their economy a significant amount of money. So to address this issue of a lack of babies being born, therefore there's going to be fewer people in the workforce, especially people who can take care of the elderly in kind of healthcare needs. To address this, Japan's companies are leading the development of something called CareBots. And CareBots are robots specifically designed to assist elderly people, and it's an industry that is growing in a big way. 1/3 of the Japanese government's budget is allocated to developing CareBots. So the global personal robot market, which includes CareBots, could reach $17.4 billion by 2020. For example, Honda's Asimo robot is an autonomous humanoid robot that could help the elderly get in and out of bed, give them food, and turn off lights. So aside from this application, robots or artificial intelligence is going to play a significant part in our daily lives in the next 10 to 30 years. Earlier I mentioned problems of Russia faced with In an earlier lecture, I mentioned the problems Russia faces with alcoholism and smoking. Here are some statistics, but you don't need to know them for a quiz. The average Russian drinks 50 bottles of vodka per year. A bottle of beer costs less than a bottle of drinking water. The average life expectancy for Russian men is 60 years, compared with 75 for men. Russian women have an average life expectancy of 67 years, compared to 80 for American women. Between 600,000 and 700,000 Russians die each year from alcohol-related causes. About 30 to 50% of Russia's vodka market is illegal. And so here's also an article from a few years back discussing how Russia is trying to reverse this trend of a declining population. And it actually has succeeded so far in kind of reversing this declining trend. But here the government is going to have a national day of births and go home and have sex and win prizes. If you have born on National Day, you'll receive cars or trucks, TVs, other prizes. And for this year, as I said, it was a couple years ago, a couple won a grand prize of an SUV. So there are just a few examples of countries that are facing a declining population where the total fertility rate is below this 2.1, which is the replacement level. In the news, we are constantly hearing how there are too many people and how we need to reduce the world's population. But here are some examples of countries that will face severe consequences in the near future because of a declining population. On that note, have a great day.